I was 37 years old when I discovered that my neighbor had been stealing packages from my front porch, and the only reason I knew was because of the trail cameras I had installed around my property in Asheville, North Carolina. The footage was crystal clear, time-stamped, and automatically uploaded to cloud storage every single night. What I didn't expect was that my discovery would trigger a war with the Mountain View Estates Homeowners Association that would eventually land several people in handcuffs. My name is Wesley Richardson, and I had lived in Mountain View Estates for 3 years. The neighborhood was one of those cookie-cutter developments built in 2019, with houses that all looked vaguely similar and lawns that were expected to meet certain standards. I worked from home as a software developer, which meant I was around the house most of the day, but I still had packages disappear with alarming regularity. After the 5th missing delivery in 2 months, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I purchased 4 trail cameras, the kind hunters use to monitor wildlife. They were motion-activated, had excellent night vision, and most importantly, they connected to my Wi-Fi network and uploaded footage directly to the cloud. I installed them strategically around my property, one facing the front porch, one covering the driveway, one monitoring the side yard, and one watching the backyard. Within a week, I had my answer. My neighbor, a guy named Derek who lived 2 houses down, was creeping onto my porch in the early morning hours and taking any packages he could find. The footage showed him approaching my house at 5 in the morning, looking around nervously, grabbing a box from Amazon, and hurrying back to his own home. I had video of him doing this on 3 separate occasions. I was planning to take the footage to the police when I got home one Tuesday afternoon to find all 4 of my cameras missing. Not damaged, not knocked down by weather, but completely removed from their mounting points. Someone had unscrewed them and taken them. I checked my cloud storage immediately, and the footage was all there, including video from that very morning. But the cameras themselves were gone. The next day, I received a letter in my mailbox. It was on official Mountain View Estates HOA letterhead, and it was signed by Patricia Cunningham, the HOA president. The letter informed me that my trail cameras had been confiscated because they violated multiple HOA covenants. According to Patricia, the cameras were an unauthorized exterior modification, they were visible from the street, and they potentially invaded the privacy of other residents. The letter stated that the cameras would not be returned, and that I was being fined $500 for the violation. I read the letter 3 times, my anger building with each pass. The cameras had cost me almost $600 total. They were my property, installed on my property, and Patricia had just admitted in writing that the HOA had stolen them. I called the number listed on the letterhead immediately. A woman answered on the 3rd ring. Mountain View Estates HOA, this is Patricia speaking. This is Wesley Richardson on Oakmont Drive. I just received your letter about my cameras. Oh yes, Mr. Richardson. Her voice had that particular tone that I had come to recognize in certain middle-aged women who wielded tiny amounts of power like they were running a small kingdom. I'm glad you received that. As I outlined in the letter, those cameras were in clear violation of our community standards. You stole my property, I said, keeping my voice level. Those cameras cost me $600, and you had no right to remove them from my house. They were a violation, Mr. Richardson. The HOA board has the authority to remove violations from properties when homeowners refuse to comply with our covenants. I never refused anything. I never received any warning, any notice, any opportunity to address the issue. You just came onto my property and took my belongings. The covenants are very clear. Dura, Patricia said, and I could hear papers rustling. Section 12, paragraph 4. No exterior modifications may be made to any property without prior written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. Section 18, paragraph 2. No surveillance equipment may be installed in a manner that is visible from public streets or that may infringe upon the reasonable privacy expectations of neighboring residents. Those cameras were on my house, monitoring my property, because someone has been stealing my packages. That's a matter for the police, not for unauthorized surveillance equipment. The cameras aren't unauthorized. They're on my property, and I want them back today, or I'm filing a police report for theft. Patricia's voice went cold. If you file a police report, Mr. Richardson, I will have no choice but to pursue the maximum fines allowed under our covenants. That's $250 per day per violation. You had 4 cameras, so that's $1,000 per day, backdated to when they were first installed. You're threatening me? I'm informing you of the consequences of your choices. The cameras violated our covenants. They have been confiscated. If you continue to be difficult about this, the fines will continue to accumulate. Do you understand? I understood perfectly. Patricia Cunningham was a bully who was used to people backing down, but I had something she didn't know about. I'll be in touch, I said and hung up. I spent the rest of that afternoon downloading every piece of footage from my cloud storage. I had weeks of video, all time-stamped and dated. I had Derek stealing my packages. I had the postal carrier delivering mail. I had squirrels, birds, the occasional deer wandering through my yard, and most importantly, I had footage from the day my cameras were taken. The video showed Patricia Cunningham herself, along with 2 other people I recognized from neighborhood meetings, arriving at my house at 2 in the afternoon. They spent nearly 30 minutes removing all 4 cameras, unscrewing them from their mounts and placing them in cardboard boxes. They were thorough, checking each camera carefully before taking it. And they did all of this while I was out running errands. I made copies of everything and stored them in 3 different places: my personal hard drive, an external backup drive, and a separate cloud service that had nothing to do with the cameras themselves. Then I called the Asheville Police Department. The officer who took my report was a woman in her 40s named Officer Sandra Martinez. She listened to my story, watched the footage on my laptop, and shook her head. "So let me get this straight," she said. "You installed cameras on your property to catch a package thief, which you did. Then your HOA president came onto your property and took the cameras, claiming they were violations, and you have video of all of this." "That's exactly right. And the HOA president admitted in writing that they took your cameras and won't return them." I handed her the letter. She read it, her expression darkening. "This is theft," she said flatly. "I don't care what their HOA covenants say. They can fine you, they can send you letters, they can even sue you in civil court if they think you violated their rules. But they can't come onto your property and take your belongings. That's theft." That's what I thought. "I'm going to need copies of all this footage, and I'll need the contact information for Patricia Cunningham. We'll be paying her a visit." I provided everything Officer Martinez needed. She told me she would be in touch, and that I should not contact Patricia or anyone else from the HOA board in the meantime. I agreed, feeling a sense of satisfaction that I hadn't felt in days. 2 days later, Officer Martinez called me back. "Mr. Richardson, we contacted Ms. Cunningham about your cameras. She confirmed that she took them, but maintains that she had the legal authority to do so under the HOA covenants. She's refusing to return them." "So what happens now?" "We've informed her that if the cameras aren't returned within 24 hours, we'll be filing criminal charges for theft. The DA's office has reviewed the case and agrees that the HOA exceeded their authority. No covenant gives them the right to confiscate personal property without a court order." "Will she return them?" "I honestly don't know. She seemed pretty convinced that she was in the right, but I wanted to give you a heads up. This might get complicated." It got complicated fast. The next morning, I received another letter from the HOA, this time from their lawyer. The letter stated that I was being fined $10,000 for violation of community covenants, that a lien would be placed on my property if the fine wasn't paid within 30 days, and that the HOA would be pursuing legal action to force me to comply with all community standards. The letter also stated that my cameras had been disposed of as unauthorized equipment and were no longer available for return. I called Officer Martinez immediately. "They destroyed them," I told her. "Their lawyer just sent me a letter saying the cameras were disposed of." "When did you receive this letter?" "Today. It's dated yesterday." "So they destroyed evidence after we told them we were considering criminal charges. That's obstruction of justice." "What do I do?" "Forward me that letter. And I think you need to get a lawyer yourself, Mr. Richardson. This is beyond a simple theft case now." I took her advice and contacted a lawyer that same afternoon. His name was Michael Brennan, and he specialized in property law and HOA disputes. I met with him at his office in downtown Asheville the next day. Michael was in his early 50s with graying hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He listened to my entire story without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and whistled. "You have all the footage?" he asked. "Everything, including them taking the cameras and the guy stealing my packages." "And the police are already involved?" "Officer Martinez said they might file criminal charges." "Good. Here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to file a lawsuit against the HOA for theft, destruction of property, and violation of your property rights. Second, we're going to countersue regarding their $10,000 fine and the lien threat. Third, we're going to send a demand letter to every member of the HOA board, putting them on notice that they could be held personally liable for their actions." "Can they actually be held personally liable?" "Oh, yes. When HOA board members act outside the scope of their authority or engage in illegal conduct, they can lose the liability protections that normally shield them. What Patricia Cunningham did was steal your property and then destroy it. That's criminal. The fact that she did it while claiming HOA authority doesn't protect her." "How long will this take?" "Months, probably. Maybe longer. But I think we have a very strong case. And honestly, Mr. Richardson, I think there might be more going on here than just an overzealous HOA president." "What do you mean?" "You said your cameras caught your neighbor stealing packages. Have you reported that to the police?" "Not yet. I was going to, but then the HOA thing happened and it kind of took over." "Report it. Today. Because I'm willing to bet that your neighbor is connected to Patricia Cunningham somehow. Maybe they're friends. Maybe they're related. But there's a reason she moved so aggressively to get rid of those cameras. And I don't think it's just about HOA covenants." That afternoon, I filed a police report about Derek stealing my packages. I provided Officer Martinez with all the footage I had. She watched it carefully, confirmed that it clearly showed Derek's face, and said they would be following up with him. "Did you notice anything else interesting in this footage?" she asked. "Like what?" "Like the car that's parked on the street in the background here." She pointed to the screen. "That's Patricia Cunningham's car. I recognize it from when we visited her. And look at the timestamp. This is 5:15 in the morning, and her car is parked right in front of Derek's house." I looked closer. She was right. Patricia's distinctive silver Mercedes was visible in the background of the footage that showed Derek stealing my package. "You think they're working together?" "I think it's worth looking into. Let me do some digging." Over the next week, several things happened in rapid succession. Michael filed our lawsuit against the HOA, seeking damages for the stolen and destroyed cameras, legal fees, and emotional distress. The police charged Patricia Cunningham with theft and destruction of property, and Officer Martinez discovered that Patricia and Derek were not just neighbors, but that Derek was Patricia's nephew. The connection explained everything. Derek had been stealing packages from multiple houses in the neighborhood for months. When I installed cameras and caught him on video, Patricia had panicked and used her position as HOA president to confiscate and destroy the evidence. The whole thing about HOA violations was just a pretext, but Officer Martinez found something else too. When they searched Derek's house with a warrant, they found not just my packages, but dozens of others. Derek had been running a small-scale fencing operation, stealing packages and reselling the contents online. And when they examined his financial records, they found several payments to Patricia, suggesting she had been getting a cut of the profits. The case exploded. Derek was charged with multiple counts of theft and receiving stolen property. Patricia was charged with theft, destruction of evidence, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit theft. The two other HOA board members who had helped remove my cameras were charged as accessories, though they claimed they had just been following Patricia's orders and didn't know about the package theft scheme. The local news picked up the story. A reporter from the Asheville Citizen-Times contacted me for an interview. I agreed, and the resulting article detailed the whole situation: the package thefts, the trail cameras, the HOA confiscation, and the criminal conspiracy. The headline read, "HOA, President Arrested for Covering Up Nephew's Package Theft Ring." The article went viral in the local community. Other residents of Mountain View Estates started coming forward with their own stories of missing packages and overbearing HOA enforcement. It turned out that Patricia had been using her position to bully residents for years, and the theft scheme was just the latest in a long pattern of abuse of power. The HOA held an emergency meeting to address the crisis. I attended, along with about 50 other residents. The two remaining board members, looking shell-shocked, announced that Patricia had been removed from her position and that the board was being dissolved pending a complete reorganization. They also announced that all fines Patricia had issued in the past year were being reviewed and would likely be rescinded. A woman I didn't recognize stood up from the back of the room. "What about all the money that's missing from the HOA accounts?" she asked. The room went silent. One of the board members, a man named Thomas, cleared his throat nervously. "What are you talking about?" he asked. "I'm talking about the fact that I requested the HOA financial records last month under state law, and they show that over $40,000 has been withdrawn from our reserve fund in the past 2 years with no documentation or explanation." The murmuring in the room grew louder. Thomas and the other board member, a woman named Linda, exchanged glances. "We'll need to investigate that," Thomas said weakly. "I already investigated it," the woman said. "I'm an accountant, and the withdrawals were all authorized by Patricia Cunningham, with no approval from the rest of the board and no records of what the money was used for." The meeting descended into chaos. Residents were shouting questions, demanding answers, and calling for a complete audit of the HOA finances. I sat there, watching the scene unfold, and realized that my trail cameras had uncovered something much bigger than a simple package theft scheme. Over the next few weeks, as lawyers and accountants dug into the HOA records, the full scope of Patricia's misconduct became clear. She had been embezzling money from the HOA for at least 2 years, using her position as president to authorize payments to fake vendors and contractors. The money had been funneled into personal accounts belonging to both her and Derek. The package theft scheme had apparently started when they needed additional cash flow and thought it would be a low-risk way to supplement their income. The total amount stolen was eventually calculated at $52,000. The DA's office added embezzlement and fraud charges to Patricia's growing list of crimes. Derek was also charged with money laundering for his role in helping to conceal the embezzled funds. My lawsuit against the HOA was settled out of court. The HOA's insurance carrier agreed to pay me $12,000 for the stolen cameras, legal fees, and damages. The $10,000 fine Patricia had levied against me was voided, and the HOA formally apologized in writing. But the criminal case was the main event. Patricia and Derek both pleaded not guilty initially, but as the evidence mounted, that position became increasingly untenable. The prosecution had footage from my trail cameras showing Derek committing theft. They had financial records showing the embezzlement. They had testimony from multiple residents who had lost packages. And they had the physical evidence from Derek's house, including items that could be traced back to specific victims. In late September, about 5 months after my cameras were confiscated, both Patricia and Derek accepted plea deals. Derek pleaded guilty to 15 counts of theft and 1 count of receiving stolen property. He was sentenced to 3 years in state prison and ordered to pay restitution to his victims. Patricia pleaded guilty to theft, embezzlement, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. She was sentenced to 5 years in state prison and ordered to pay full restitution to both the HOA and the individual victims of the package theft scheme. The 2 other board members who had helped confiscate my cameras were given probation and community service after agreeing to testify against Patricia. They claimed, credibly, that they had believed Patricia when she said the cameras were HOA violations and had no knowledge of the underlying criminal scheme. Through all of this, I had replaced my trail cameras with new ones, and this time I made sure to document everything properly. I submitted a formal request to the newly reorganized HOA board for permission to install exterior security cameras on my property. The new board, having learned their lesson, approved the request immediately and even updated the community covenants to explicitly allow security cameras as long as they didn't point directly into neighbors' windows. The new cameras were better than the old ones, with higher resolution and improved night vision. I installed them in the same locations as before, and they continued to upload footage to the cloud automatically. I never had another package stolen, but the story didn't end with the criminal convictions. The civil litigation continued for months, Other residents who had been fined or sanctioned by Patricia filed lawsuits against the HOA, claiming that her pattern of abuse had created a hostile living environment. The HOA's insurance carrier settled most of these claims, but the legal fees and settlements depleted the community's reserves. In early December, the new HOA board called a special meeting to discuss the financial situation. I attended along with most of the neighborhood. The board president, a retired teacher named Margaret Walsh, laid out the situation clearly. The previous board's actions, particularly those of Patricia Cunningham, have cost our community over $200,000 in legal fees, settlements, and stolen funds, she said. Our reserves are gone. We're going to need to implement a special assessment to cover the shortfall and rebuild our emergency fund. There was grumbling, but most people understood that it was necessary. The board proposed a special assessment of $1,500 per household, payable over 12 months. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than the alternative of letting the HOA go bankrupt. During the public comment period, I stood up to speak. I just want to say that I don't blame the community for what happened, I said. Patricia Cunningham was a criminal who abused her position, but this whole situation has taught me something important about HOA governance. We need transparency, we need accountability, and we need to make sure that no one person has too much power. I hope the new board will implement checks and balances to prevent this from ever happening again. There was a smattering of applause. Margaret nodded. We've already begun implementing new procedures, she said. All financial transactions over $500 now require approval from at least 3 board members. We're publishing detailed financial reports monthly. We're holding open board meetings twice a month instead of once a quarter, and we're establishing a community oversight committee to review board actions and investigate complaints. These reforms were exactly what was needed. Over the next few months, the new board proved itself to be transparent, responsive, and reasonable. The special assessment was paid without too much complaint. The community's finances stabilized, and life in Mountain View Estates slowly returned to normal. As for me, I became somewhat of a local celebrity, at least in the neighborhood. People would stop me while I was getting my mail or mowing my lawn to thank me for exposing Patricia's crimes. Some asked for advice about their own HOA disputes in other communities. A few even asked if I would consider running for the HOA board myself. I declined those offers. I had no interest in HOA politics, but I did stay involved in a limited way, attending meetings regularly and keeping an eye on how the community was being managed. My experience had taught me that vigilance was important, that you couldn't just assume the people in charge were acting in good faith. The trial cameras continued to record, uploading their footage to the cloud every night. I checked the footage occasionally, more out of habit than necessity. Mostly it showed the usual suburban wildlife, squirrels, rabbits, the occasional fox. Sometimes it caught neighbors walking their dogs or kids playing in the street. Nothing exciting, nothing criminal. In February of the following year, I received a letter in the mail from the North Carolina Department of Corrections. It was from Patricia Cunningham. I stared at the envelope for a long moment, debating whether to open it or just throw it away. Curiosity won out. The letter was handwritten, several pages long. Patricia's handwriting was neat and precise, the kind of penmanship that suggested someone who took pride in appearances. Dear Mr. Richardson, it began. I am writing to you from the North Carolina Correctional Institution for Women, where I'm currently serving my sentence for the crimes I committed against you and the Mountain View Estates community. I am not writing to ask for forgiveness or to make excuses for my actions. I know that what I did was wrong, and I am accepting responsibility for it. But I wanted you to understand how it happened, not as a justification, but as an explanation. The letter went on to describe how Patricia had started embezzling money from the HOA after her husband left her, and she found herself struggling financially. She claimed that Derek had gotten involved later, first helping her hide the missing money and then suggesting they could make additional income by stealing packages. She described how the scheme had spiraled out of control, how she had become increasingly desperate to cover up what she had done, and how confiscating my cameras had seemed like the only way to protect Derek and herself. When I saw your cameras, she wrote, I panicked. I knew Derek had been caught on video, and I knew that if that footage came to light, everything would unravel. So I used my position as HOA president to take the cameras, telling myself that I was just enforcing community standards. I knew it was wrong, but I did it anyway. And then when the police got involved, I destroyed the cameras, which made everything so much worse. The letter concluded with an apology and a statement that she hoped I could eventually find it in my heart to forgive her, though she understood if I couldn't. I read the letter twice, trying to decide how I felt about it. Part of me appreciated the apology and the explanation, but another part of me was angry that she was trying to garner sympathy by explaining her financial struggles. Lots of people faced financial difficulties without turning to crime. I decided not to respond. Patricia was serving her sentence and I was moving on with my life. There was nothing to be gained from continuing to engage with her. Spring arrived, bringing warmer weather and blooming flowers. The neighborhood seemed to have put the scandal behind it. New families moved into some of the houses that had been sold when their owners decided they didn't want to deal with the HOA drama anymore. The new HOA board continued to function smoothly, implementing the reforms they had promised and managing the community's finances responsibly. In April, I got a call from Michael Brennan, my lawyer. "I have some good news," he said. "Remember how we filed claims with the HOA's insurance carrier for your damages?" "Yes, and they settled for $12,000. "Right. But I also filed a separate claim for emotional distress and punitive damages based on Patricia's criminal conduct. The insurance company initially denied it, but I pushed back, and they've agreed to settle. They're offering an additional $25,000. I nearly dropped the phone. $25,000? Their reasoning is that Patricia's actions were so egregious and caused you so much stress and trouble that they want to avoid a jury trial where the damages could be even higher. It's a good offer, Wesley. I recommend you take it." "I'll take it." The settlement was finalized within a week. After Michael's fees, I netted just over $30,000 from the whole ordeal. It was more money than I had expected, and it more than compensated me for the stolen cameras and the months of stress and legal battles. I decided to use some of the money to upgrade my home security system. I installed a professionally monitored alarm system, additional cameras with even better resolution, and smart locks on all my doors. I also donated $5,000 to a local victims' rights organization that helped people who had been targeted by theft and fraud. The rest of the money went into savings. I had learned an important lesson about the value of being prepared and protecting yourself, and I wanted to make sure I had a solid emergency fund in case something like this ever happened again. Summer arrived and life settled into a comfortable routine. I worked from home, took walks around the neighborhood, and occasionally attended HOA meetings to stay informed. The community had recovered from the scandal, and the new board was doing a good job of managing things. One evening in July, I was reviewing the footage from my trail cameras when I noticed something unusual. One of the cameras, the one pointed at the side yard, had captured someone walking through my property at 2 in the morning. It wasn't Derek. He was in prison. It was someone I didn't recognize, a young man in a dark hoodie. I watched the footage carefully. The man had walked from the street through my side yard and into my backyard. He had spent about 5 minutes back there, though the camera angles didn't show exactly what he was doing. Then, he had left the same way he came. I checked the other cameras. The backyard camera showed him examining my air conditioning unit, but he didn't appear to take anything or damage anything. He seemed to be looking at it, maybe taking pictures with his phone. I was puzzled. It wasn't threatening behavior exactly, but it was definitely trespassing. I saved the footage and made a note to keep an eye on things. 2 nights later, it happened again. The same young man, same time of night, same pattern. This time, the backyard camera caught him more clearly, and I could see that he was definitely taking pictures of my air conditioning unit. I called Officer Martinez, who had stayed in touch after the case against Patricia and Derek concluded. "I've got someone trespassing on my property at night," I told her. "The trail cameras caught him twice. He seems interested in my air conditioning unit." "Air conditioning unit? That's odd. Send me the footage." I emailed her the videos. She called me back an hour later. "I showed this to our property crimes unit," she said. "They think he might be casing houses for copper theft. Air conditioning units have copper tubing and wiring that can be sold to scrapyards for decent money. There's been a rash of these thefts in the area lately." "So what should I do?" Keep recording. If he comes back again, call 911 immediately. We'll try to catch him in the act. And in the meantime, you might want to consider installing some motion-activated lights in your backyard. That might deter him. I installed the lights the next day, bright LED floodlights that would illuminate the entire backyard if anything moved. That night, they worked perfectly. The young man returned around 2 in the morning, and the moment he stepped into my backyard, the lights blazed on. I watched on my phone, which received alerts from the camera system. The guy froze, looked around nervously, and then ran. I called 911. The police arrived within minutes, but the trespasser was long gone. However, I had excellent footage of his face from when he looked up at the lights. The police took the footage and ran it through their database. They identified him within days. His name was Brandon Pierce, and he had a record of previous thefts. The police got a warrant and arrested him at his apartment. When they searched the place, they found copper tubing and wiring from several air conditioning units, along with receipts from scrap yards showing he had sold similar items. Brandon was charged with multiple counts of theft and trespassing. The police contacted several other homeowners in the area who had reported air conditioning thefts, and my camera footage helped establish a timeline and pattern that linked Brandon to those crimes as well. Once again, my trail cameras had caught a criminal in the act. Once again, the cloud storage had preserved the evidence, even though the criminal never touched the cameras themselves. And once again, I was reminded of why I had installed the cameras in the first place, to protect my property and my peace of mind. The case against Brandon moved quickly. Faced with overwhelming video evidence, he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 18 months in jail and ordered to pay restitution to all his victims. I received about $800 in restitution for the attempted theft, even though nothing had actually been stolen from my property. In October, nearly 18 months after the whole ordeal with Patricia Cunningham began, I was interviewed by a regional news station doing a story about the importance of home security systems. They were interested in my experience because I had now helped solve 2 separate criminal cases using my trail cameras. The reporter, a woman in her 30s named Jennifer Cole, interviewed me in my front yard with my house visible in the background. "So you've had quite the experience with these cameras," she said. "You could say that. I initially installed them to catch a package thief, which they did. But they ended up exposing an HOA president who was covering up her nephew's crimes and embezzling money from the community. And then more recently, they helped catch someone who was casing houses for copper theft. And the key to all of this was the cloud storage." Absolutely. In the first case, the HOA president confiscated my cameras and destroyed them. But because the footage was already uploaded to the cloud, she couldn't destroy the evidence. That's what led to her arrest and conviction. What advice would you give to other homeowners who are considering installing security cameras? Do it. The technology is affordable, it's easy to set up, and it gives you peace of mind. But make sure you use cloud storage or some other off-site backup system. If the footage is only stored on the camera itself, it can be stolen or destroyed. The cloud storage saved me. The interview aired that evening and was posted on the news station's website. It got shared widely on social media, and I received dozens of messages from people thanking me for the advice or asking for recommendations on specific camera systems. I had never intended to become an advocate for home security systems, but I found that I didn't mind the role. If my experience could help other people protect themselves and their property, that was a good thing. In December, almost 2 years after the initial package thefts, I attended the Mountain View Estates HOA annual meeting. The community had come a long way. The special assessment had been paid off. The reserves were rebuilt. The new board had established a track record of competent, transparent governance. And most importantly, the culture of the community had changed. Residents were more engaged, more willing to speak up, and more vigilant about holding the board accountable. During the meeting, Margaret Walsh, the board president, gave a year-end report. "This has been a challenging few years for our community," she said. "We've dealt with criminal misconduct by our former board president, significant financial losses, and a lot of uncertainty about the future. But I'm proud of how we've responded. We've implemented real reforms, we've rebuilt our finances, and we've created a stronger, more transparent system of governance." There was applause from the residents in attendance. I want to particularly thank Wesley Richardson, Margaret continued, looking at me. If he hadn't installed those trail cameras and caught the criminal activity on video, we might never have discovered what was happening. His actions led to justice being served and ultimately made our community better. More applause. I felt my face flush with embarrassment, but I appreciated the recognition. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to thank me personally. One of them, an elderly woman named Helen, who lived across the street, squeezed my hand. "You're a good man, Wesley," she said. "You stood up when it would have been easier to back down. We need more people like you." I drove home that night feeling satisfied. The trail cameras were still recording, still uploading their footage to the cloud every night. They had cost me less than $1,000 initially, and they had helped put 3 criminals in jail, recovered over $50,000 in stolen money, and made my neighborhood a safer place. As I pulled into my driveway, the camera facing the front porch activated, recording my arrival. I waved at it, knowing the footage would be uploaded and stored securely. I had learned a lot over the past 2 years. I had learned that HOAs could be corrupted by bad actors. I had learned that standing up for yourself sometimes meant fighting battles you never expected to fight. And I had learned that technology, used wisely, could be a powerful tool for truth and justice. But most importantly, I had learned that you should never underestimate the value of having evidence backed up in the cloud. Patricia Cunningham had thought that by confiscating my cameras, she could make the problem go away. She had been wrong. The footage was already safe, already preserved, already beyond her reach. In early January, I received one final letter related to the case. It was from the North Carolina Restitution Center, informing me that Patricia Cunningham had made her first restitution payment. The amount was small, just $50, but it represented a start. Over the course of her sentence and her probation period afterward, she would be required to pay back every dollar she had stolen. I deposited the check and filed the letter away. The whole ordeal was finally, truly over. Patricia was in prison, Derek was in prison, Brandon was in jail, the HOA was functioning properly, my property was secure, and my trail cameras kept watching, kept recording, and kept uploading to the cloud. Life in Mountain View Estates returned to normal, or at least to a new normal that included lessons learned and reforms implemented. I continued my work as a software developer, occasionally checking the camera footage, but mostly just living my life. In March, I was contacted by a local community college that wanted me to speak to their criminal justice students about the role of technology in solving crimes. I agreed, and I gave a presentation about my experience with the trail cameras and the cloud storage. The students were engaged and asked thoughtful questions. Several of them told me afterward that they were considering careers in digital forensics after hearing my story. I also started volunteering with a neighborhood watch program that had been established in the wake of the package theft scandal. We met monthly to discuss community safety issues and share information about suspicious activity. I shared my knowledge about security cameras and cloud storage, and several other residents installed similar systems based on my recommendations. By the summer, Mountain View Estates had one of the lowest property crime rates in the county. Whether that was because of the increased surveillance, the active neighborhood watch, or just criminals knowing about what had happened with Patricia and Derek, I couldn't say. But whatever the reason, it was working. My trail cameras continued to record the mundane rhythms of suburban life. Deliveries arriving and being picked up without incident, neighbors walking their dogs, kids riding bikes, the occasional wildlife passing through. Nothing criminal, nothing threatening. That was fine with me. I had had enough excitement to last a lifetime. The cameras were there if I needed them, the footage was safely backed up in the cloud, and I could sleep soundly, knowing that my property was protected and my community was safe. Sometimes I thought about Patricia serving her sentence in prison and wondered if she had learned anything from the experience. I thought about Derek, who had thrown away his freedom for stolen packages and a share of embezzled money. I thought about Brandon, the copper thief who had been caught by the same technology that had caught the others, and I thought about how a simple decision to install trail cameras to catch a package thief had ended up changing my life and my community in ways I never could have anticipated. The cameras had cost me $600. The HOA had confiscated them, thinking they could suppress the evidence, but the footage was already in the cloud, already safe, already working its way toward justice. In the end, that was the lesson that mattered most. Evidence doesn't disappear just because someone takes the cameras. The truth doesn't vanish just because someone tries to hide it. And justice, though it might be delayed, eventually finds its way forward. The trail cameras kept recording, the cloud kept storing, and I kept living my life, secure in the knowledge that I had done the right thing, that I had stood up when it mattered, and that my community was better for it. Wesley Richardson, homeowner in Mountain View Estates, software developer, and accidental crime fighter. All because I installed some trail cameras and made sure the footage backed up to the cloud.